What is going on, everyone? Tim from Tierfon Orbital. Today is going to be a relatively deep dive on an install commission that I completed on a Roman props Graflex. So this particular Graflex is in Empire or ESB configuration. It's in an Empire Strikes Back config. The customer for this particular install commissioned me to design a reveal chassis, something that was just not your run-of-the-mill chassis. He wanted to do something very, very special for this Graflex. So right off the bat, right, Graflexes such as these are never run-of-the-mill installs, right? So this is a replica Graflex flash gun. Doing chassis for these is not easy. In fact, I actually cheated a little bit when I did this install, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But designing chassis rather for these is a little difficult, right? So you've got to take a lot of things into account, right? You've got to take into account the glass eye or the red button, whichever configuration it's in. You've got to take into account this rear red button because you've got to design a chassis where your buttons are in the right place, but you've still got enough room to put your blade in, right? And this sliding switch, if you want to make this an actual switch, you've got to design that into the chassis as well. So there's a lot going on measurement-wise when you're designing a chassis for this particular hilt. So it is not a very easy hilt to design a chassis for, right? But I did want to do something very special. So something that I have been doing a lot more of are these, I call them hybrid chassis or heirloom chassis, whatever you want to, master chassis, I think that name is taken. But I like doing chassis that have brass greeblies and brass accents on them. It just gives it a little bit more character, in my opinion. It makes it a little bit more unique. So yeah, I've been doing that a lot more, and that's what I did with this particular chassis. So we've got a main body that I designed, and it was printed in MJF nylon. And then we've got a number of brass accents on it, right? So I'm really, really, really happy with how this came out. In fact, I don't have an ESB or an Empire Graflex in my collection. I am a New Hope guy. The New Hope Graflex is always my favorite. So I don't have an ESB in my collection, but I think that I want to do one of these for myself because it's just a really, really cool looking chassis, and I'm really, really proud of how it came out, right? So let's come into Fusion and talk about all of these parts, right? And then we'll come up top and talk about how to use it, and then we'll put a blade in it, and then we'll be on our way, right? So let's come into Fusion. Okay, so here it is. There is a lot going on this chassis, right? So let's talk about the main body of the chassis first, okay? Along each side of the chassis, I have vents for some shine through. I've got 2020 neopixel strips on each side that are underneath these vents, okay? Then I designed some brass vents to go over these, right? So each side of these have a brass mesh or a brass vent that goes in front of it, okay? At the bottom, obviously, we've got a fully enclosed 28mm speaker. This is from Smuggler's Outpost. I designed a ring that kind of circles the speaker. I was concerned that this wouldn't work, but luckily my tolerances were just perfect, right? And they aligned up really, really nicely. So I'm really happy with how that turned out. We have our kill switch up top here. So the reason that the kill switch is in this orientation is because I wanted to make sure that the kill switch was able to be reached by just taking off the bottom grip. So, without having to pull the entire chassis out, you can hit that kill switch by just taking the grip off, right? So I had it down here. This is the first time I've done a kill switch that is tilted like this. And I'm also really, really happy with how that came out, okay? Each side of the speaker has these brass vent greeblies. These are done in brass. All of this was done in polished brass, and then I went back and weathered it all, right? We have two other greeblies along the other radius of the chassis. Making our way up, obviously, here's our battery tray. So one of the things that I love about Graflexes, there's so much room. There is so much room in a Graflex, right? So you can put greeblies and ridges and all kinds of stuff on a Graflex chassis, right? There is a board and battery cover. Here is the battery cover. This is all solid brass. I'm really, really happy with how the greebly work came out on that one. Around back, we also have a board cover. Everything is held in place with nice big 3mm magnets. So I'm not worried about anything kind of coming loose. I like designing when I'm doing hybrid chassis like this, I like using bigger magnets. They're just easier to work with. They're way stronger. And I'm not like losing 1mm magnets all over the place, right? Above the battery, there's another, I guess this is like a vent, a brass greebly that is put in this channel here. And that's it, right? Upper section of the hilt, we do have some light greebly work, right? You're probably asking yourself, why does the top of this look so strange? So I was talking earlier about how I cheated a little bit when I designed this chassis. I designed this chassis to marry up into an Elite Graflex blade holder from KR Sabers. I wanted to do that because the blade holder that KR designed, Cal and Company, it's perfect, right? So it's got the switches in the right spot. It's got my aux switch in the right spot. So all I had to do was try and marry up this main chassis into that blade holder, right? So full disclosure, figuring out, these tolerances took me a couple of test prints, right? So basically I sliced this top part off and did a couple test prints to make sure it married up into that Graflex holder correctly. And when I figured that out, everything is secured in place with some threaded rod and barrel lugs, right? So that's it. That's the chassis. Let's come up top and talk a little bit about this guy. Okay, so let's talk about the chassis first, right? So here is the chassis. This is a large chassis. This thing is massive. By comparison, right? So here is a Goth Grandmaster chassis, right? They're huge, right? This is because, you've got so much room inside of the Graflex. You've got plenty of room to play with, right? So this almost feels like a hilt in and of itself, right? So I've taken the brass mesh off this side so we can get a good look at that neopixel accent strip. But that's it, right? All of the brass was, I got it polished, and then we went back and weathered everything just to kind of make the chassis itself look a little bit more worn and beat down, right? I also did a pass of pewter rub and buff on the main MJF chassis, and I'm really happy with how that came out, right? So like I said, we've got a battery and a board cover. Everything is held in place with 3mm magnets. I've already placed a battery in this. Let's hit that kill switch. All right, so there's that neopixel accent strip. Okay, you will probably notice that I'm missing two greeblies. Right? So I actually haven't glued these greeblies on yet. There is another vent that will be going around this side and a vent here as well, right? So anyhow, here is that Graflex Elite blade holder. This is a really, really classy blade holder that Cal and Company sell on their website. It's brass and aluminum. It looks really, really nice, right? But this is how I was able to kind of cheat, not having to design a chassis with all my switches on it, right? So we've got an aux switch around the side here, and our main is obviously up top, okay? Really, really love how this came out. Really, really happy with it. So let's talk about how to use this guy, because it is a little bit tricky, right? To put the chassis in the hilt. Okay, so when putting this chassis in, there are a few things to keep in mind, right? I have noticed that when putting the chassis in, you can sometimes activate this upper switch when it is sliding past this upper black, the other section of the blade holder. I have tried grinding down some of the material that's on that to alleviate that, but no matter how hard I try, it still always happens. And I think that is just an aspect of this particular blade holder. This brass piece is really, really close to that upper blade holder, right? This brass piece can be removed to the client or the customer. If you want to completely remove that from happening, or the possibility of that happening, you can remove this. This is it's secured in place with just a flathead screw, and that whole bar will come off, and it will still function without that, right? The red button will still function. So let's hit our kill switch.
Standing by.
Another thing to keep in mind, this is with all Graflexes too. This slide toggle is so finicky, right? So when I'm using it, I make sure that that switch is up in the up position, and then you want to slide your chassis in. Yeah, see, it did activate that time, which is fine. I mean, it's just something that I noticed, and unfortunately, sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. So once you get your chassis in, you want to take your, let's turn this off. You want to take your front red button and thread it in place. This will help secure the chassis in place, okay? And then you want to take your grip, put your grip in place, twist it, lock it, bop it, twist it, hit it, and you're ready to go, right? So here's that side toggle. And the red button around back is your main. Let's see what else we put on here.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
All right, so let's come down to the bottom. All right, so there it is. Graflex in Empire Strikes Back configuration. So another really cool thing that I did to this particular install, which was actually an idea of the customer, Graflex is another thing about Graflexes is the sound venting. It's just not to be desired, right? But with this particular install, I have drilled some perforated, or I've made some holes underneath this Kobold ring. And that gives us sound venting because there is like a little vent here on the side. So we're hiding the sound venting. And you know, that alleviated us from having to like drill into this coin at the bottom and all that. So really happy with how it sounds. It sounds really good. It sounds better than my Graflex. Right? Let's see what else we put on here. So to the customer, you did send me a number of Graflex fonts. Was able to put those on the board for you. This is a Profi V3 install. So let's put a blade in it. Okay, I am not going to tighten this. So this front flathead screw, that can serve as your blade retention, but I'm not going to tighten that. I'm just going to kind of rest my blade in. This is a really tight blade holder, so it'll probably be fine. This is great. Let's see what else we put on here. So another one of the finicky things I noticed about, I don't know if it's this red button or again if it's that Graflex blade holder. If this red button is threaded on too much, it will start activating that brass cover that is over that tactile switch. So you've got to kind of find the sweet spot where that is so you can activate it. And if you'll notice, like if you thread it on too much, it'll hit that flap, right? One more. Whoops. Yep. So that's it, right? That is the Roman Props flash gun in Empire Strikes Back configuration. As a comparison, here's the Romans from A New Hope, right? So we've got that clear bubble strip and the glass eye. This is, one of the things that I like the most about the Graflex is the New Hope version with that glass eye. But both are very, very beautiful props. And it was really, really fun doing a chassis for this one, right? I appreciate that the customer had patience and wanted me to kind of spread my wings when it came to doing the chassis for this. So I'm really, really happy with how this came out, right? So anyhow, with all that out of the way, to the customer, thank you very much for trusting me with your build. If anyone has any questions about this particular chassis or anything really, please do not be a stranger. And with that being said, may the force be with you always. Have a good one, everybody.